Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is available now as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. For more information about the book, more information about me, and more importantly, interviews with thousands of editors, literary agents, authors, all the world's best people, head to middlegradeninja.com. So a brief anecdote to get us started. When I was in fourth grade, probably the most I've ever loved a teacher, although it's a tough call because I have been blessed to have had many wonderful teachers. But my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Eddy, when she read a book that hit her emotionally, she would cry through it. And the hardest we ever heard her cry was when she read us Bridge to Terabithia. We came back from lunch and we're in the last few chapters, and it took us the rest of the day to get through them. She had to stop and repeat things. She was crying so hard. And then afterward, when she finally had finished the story, she had to leave the class, and an assistant came in to stay with us to the end of the day so she could go and collect herself. And I thought, wow, what a striking image of the power of a book, because I spent my teen years trying sometimes rottenly to make teachers cry, and never as effective as your book. Fortunately, my mother had already read it to me and I'd already enjoyed the story. So I wasn't worried about missing the ending, but I thought, my gosh, the power that a writer had held over my fourth grade teacher, and that was a memory that has stuck with me. And I thought, well, what else could a book do? So my guest tonight needs no introduction. Katherine Paterson, two-time Newbery Award winner of the Hans Christian Andersen Award. You were named in 2000 to be a living legend by the Library of Congress. I think you were one of, 80 living legends at this point?
Oh, yeah, something like that. I'm not alone in that category.
No, it's very impressive. You're with Toni Morrison, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, all kinds of
Judy Blume, Maurice Sendak, Beverly Cleary. We were the children and young adult writers among the 70, 80.
And two of them are mentioned in your newest book, Birdie's Bargain.
Yeah.
It's available if you're listening to us as this comes out, esteemed audience. You could be pre-ordering your copy of Birdie's Bargain, which will be available Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. If you're listening to us after that date, good news, you can go get it right now. So probably the best place to start is, what is your first memory of wanting to be an author?
Oh my. I didn't want to be an author as a child. And I say that with a little embarrassment because I have a lot of friends who are writers, and all the really good writers I know knew by the time they were 8, that they were going to be writers, and they were already writing great things. I was writing terrible things and not very much. Shall I recite my first published work?
Oh, absolutely.
I recite this a lot. Pat, pat, pat. There is the rat. Where is the cat? Pat, pat, pat. Obviously, I was not taught to read at school, but at school we were reading Dick and Jane, and I think Pat, pat, pat owes a lot of credit to, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyhow, it sounds like Dick and Jane to me. But I also have a letter that I wrote at the same time to my father, who was up in the hinterlands of China. And I'm not ashamed of that. He was made me very happy because he kept that letter that I had written him when I was 7 years old. And I could write pretty well when I was 7. But at school, I thought I was supposed to sound like school. At home, I was reading wonderful books. I cannot remember when I learned how to read. It was as natural as speaking to me, and I started that pretty early. And I always knew I was a reader, but I didn't imagine I'd be a writer. And indeed, when that Pat, Pat, Pat was published in the Shanghai American School newspaper, right beside it was a letter from Miss S.A. Shields, the second grade teacher, that said, the second graders' work is not up to our usual standards this week. So my first published work was published alongside my first review, which, as you can see, was not a very positive review. So nobody thought I would be a writer when I was a child. I didn't think I would be a writer when I was a child. I had a teacher, a professor in graduate school, who stopped me in the hall one day and said, "Have you ever thought of being a writer?" And she was saying this on the basis of an essay question I'd written on an exam. And I said, "No. I wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world." I mean, I majored in English literature in college. I know what great writing is. And she said, well, she was my theology professor. She said, maybe that is what God is calling you to be. Well, I didn't think God needed a lot more mediocre writers. I thought God had plenty of mediocre writers. But so I didn't start writing. But after I came back from Japan, she got me a job writing. So that's when I started being a writer, was writing curriculum for Presbyterian Church. And then I thought, I don't really like writing curriculum. I'm going to write fiction. That's what I love. And of course, nobody wanted to publish anything I wrote for many years. So I was sending things around for 7 years that nobody wanted to publish, except I sold 2 things in that 7-year period. I sold 1 short story, and the little magazine that published it died the following month. And I sold 1 poem, and the little magazine that bought it died before it published it. That was my writing career for 7 years. And I was writing quite regularly at that time, although I have to say I had 4 tiny children. And so I was writing in the cracks of my life. And a lot of stuff I've written that dates back to those days should never be published. And I hope nobody will ever find it and publish it, because I was learning how to write. You know, you have to learn how to do it. And I learned, I didn't go to school for it. I learned because I read books. And I learned how to put a sentence together. I learned how to put a paragraph together. I learned how to put a story together just because I read so much. And I didn't necessarily read wonderful things, but I read enough to know the difference between good writing and poor writing. So it was reading that turned me into a writer, and also Dr. Little, who kept pushing me until I started writing. She's of course died now, but she was very proud of the fact that she was the one who got me into writing.
So I assume she was around to see you go on to win all of the award, or at least some of the awards that you won.
Yes. And she particularly loved Great Gilly Hopkins, because she had said that she couldn't find any books with truly good characters in them. And she wanted me to write a book that had a truly good character And so I put Mamie Trotter into Gilly Hopkins. And because I think Mamie is a truly good person. And I was at a conference, it was in Mississippi, I think, and everything was running a little late. And the woman who was going to introduce me was kind of taking me down the aisle towards the stage. And this young woman grabbed me by the other arm and she said, wait, I have to ask you. I'm doing a doctoral on Southern settings in children's literature. And I have to know, who is Mamie Trotter? And I was being dragged by the other arm. And I said, God, as I went. And I've often said I didn't know from the expression on her face if they believed in God at the University of Chicago, but I was sure they didn't think she spoke with a Southern accent. But yeah, that's my true character, the person that loves unconditionally and doesn't give up on you.
Of course, I've just re-enjoyed or reread The Great Gilly Hopkins, and of course, she immediately commands sympathy from the reader, and even a little bit of admiration for how committed she is to being rotten, which fair enough. But when she was mean to Mimi, I was like, whoa, let's let's have some reason.
Yeah. It's Gilly. Of course, I got, as you probably know, get a lot of unhappy people, mostly unhappy adults from the books I've written. And there's one woman who knew my father stopped me, and because she was so upset about Gilly's bad language. And she said, what does your father think of this book? Now, my father was a conservative Presbyterian minister who'd been a missionary in China. And I said, well, and it was absolutely true. I said, of all the books I've written, Gilly Hopkins is his favorite. But of course, I said, he had read the parable of the prodigal son. Wasn't that mean of me? But it's true, because I think, Gilly is the prodigal who's loved by the father and welcomed home. Although Gilly couldn't stay with, that's what makes my young readers unhappy, is because Gilly couldn't stay with Mamie after she'd found that kind of love. But I'm very interested. One day I was talking to an after-school group of kids, and several kids in the group were foster kids or had been foster kids. And the children who hadn't had that experience were just really berating me for not letting Gilly stay with Mamie Trotter, and the other kids were shaking their heads, said, don't work that way.
Your endings from based on the most recent books that I've read, without spoiling anything, they don't end necessarily all sad all the time, but they don't end overly happy either. They seem to aim for sort of an honest medium. Is that a fair assessment, somewhere between happy and sad?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, and that's why I worry a little bit when children read my books when they're too young. I mean, being able to read well isn't the same thing as having an emotional maturity to read that particular book. And I would never stop a child from reading a book, because I think there's a lot of interior filter that helps you in those situations. My conservative parents never stopped me from reading anything. And I read all kinds of stuff because I read very early and I read very broadly. But I worry when children read books like mine too young, because there's a stage in your life when you need happily ever after. And I want children to be able to have happily ever after when that's what they really need. And then they get a little older and they see what the world is like, and then they're ready to read books that don't give them that straight happily ever after. Does that make sense to you, Rob?
It does. I know that one of Birdie's big concerns is adults lying to her all of the time. And I think that if Birdie came to one of your books, she wouldn't feel that way about you.
I hope not.
I've got, I've got one question that I think will lead us directly to Birdie's Bargain, because I've got a lot of questions about Birdie's Bargain. I absolutely love this book.
Oh, I'm so glad.
But I had heard you say in an interview that you want a version of yourself at 5 living in the Grand Peninsula Hotel, being sneered at by British tourists, to be in every book that you write. Why do you want that? And who is that character in Birdie's Bargain?
Well, I just want that child to be in me as I write. It doesn't mean that every character I write is going to be that child. But I want to remember what it feels like to be sneered at. And that's why I think it's so important that we respect children, respect their feelings, especially. And it just drives me crazy when adults say, well, of course, it's too young, they won't understand that. And they don't understand it as an adult does, but they feel it even more deeply than most adults. And, you know, I've had adults lambaste me and say, no child would ever understand your books, they're too intense. And I think, don't you remember how things felt when you were a child or an adolescent, when you thought everything was the end of the world? I don't want to ever forget how deeply I felt as a child. Now I'll be 89 next month. And I can take a lot of things without being torn to pieces that I couldn't have taken when I was 9. But I think that depth of feeling, I want that depth of feeling to be in all my books. Even, you know, when I started writing Gilly Hopkins, it was going to be my funny book because I was following BRIDGE to Terabithia, which is on everybody's death list. You want to talk about I thought, I need to write a book in which nobody dies, because I seem to have gotten a reputation for killing off people that people cared about. And so I thought it was going to be funny, but apparently, if it's my book, it's not going to be all that funny. There may be funny bits. And I hope in every book I write, there'll be times when people will smile at least, if not laugh out loud. Because I want the whole spectrum of human thought and feeling in every book I write. But
Well, for what it's worth, one of the questions I had for you was about humor because I laughed out loud with every one of these books, yes, including Bridge to Terabithia, not so much near the end, but early on,
Yeah.
many lines. And Birdie's Bargain is hysterical in multiple places. Do you crack yourself up when you write? How do you get your humor in there, or is that something that comes into the second draft where you're looking for the opportunities to get a joke?
No. But I remember when I was writing, I keep kicking my little table that I've got this on. I'm sorry. I was writing the same stuff as Stars, and I began writing it because I knew I was going to write a book about a kid whose father was in prison. And I was plodding along. It was so dismal. I thought, I don't think I can write this book. It's just so sad. And all of a sudden one day I thought, give her a little brother, for heaven's sakes. And so Bernie was born to carry the entertainment factor of the book.
Well, we were talking just before we got started about Jacob Have I Loved, and when the girls have to find home for these poor kittens that have lived with a woman that's passed, or that's now in a hospital. If I may explain your own book to you, because they're worried that they're going to have to be destroyed, they drug them and they're passing them out around so that everyone's seeing, oh, what a sweet, sedate little kitten. This will be no trouble tomorrow. Of course, I'm going to take this
until it wears off. Yeah. Well, you may have to explain my books to me because I've been writing for so long that sometimes I forget whole things in the books. And I was in the process of writing a speech for a couple of weeks from now at my alma mater. And I went back because I was trying to prove a point about what I write about. I went back to my very first novel. It wasn't as though the book I remembered. I thought this one marvelous scene was the end of the book. It wasn't the end of the book. That scene didn't even play out the way I remembered. The end of the book was 10 pages later with another scene. So, and I remember my youngest, I have 4 children, and my younger daughter was far too young to read Jacob I Love when I wrote it. And so by the time she read it, oh no, it wasn't Jacob. It was my second book, Of Nightingales That Weep. And she came to ask me a question about it. And I didn't remember anything about what she said. I said, well, give me a hint. Tell me what the context is. And she looked at me in utter amazement. And she said, Mom, you wrote this book. She couldn't believe I could forget anything in one of my own books. I said, well, it's been a long time since I wrote it. And I've written a lot of books since then. Well, she didn't excuse me for that because she has a wonderful memory. And if I need anything remembered, I always ask Mary. But I don't have that good a memory, even of my own books. And I was going to, in order to write the speech, which is the theme of the series, is listen to your life. And I thought, well, in order to write that, I should reread all my novels. I didn't have time to do that. So I just got the first one reread for the speech. But, you know, I honestly don't remember a lot about them. And it always is very gratifying to me with my novels, how happy I am with them when I do reread them. Wow, I used to be able to really write. It's a good thing I still like them.
Well, that could be a nice gift to yourself, is to go and reread those books. Like, oh, this is written exactly the type of book that I enjoy. How wonderful.
Well, I think people do write the kind of books that they enjoy. Don't you think most writers do that?
The good ones do.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of my friends said, I write the books I wish I'd had when I was a child. And I think maybe there's a lot to that, that you do write the books for your young child self. I've read a lot of books as a child. I mean, I just read all the time as a child, every time I could find a book. And I still remember some of those. And I went back and reread one of my favorite books when I was middle school age, which was an adult novel, but my mother had given it to me as a present because she knew that I would love it. And it's very interesting to me. My very conservative Presbyterian missionary mother gave me The Yearling when I was 11 years old. And because she had read it and she knew I would love it. And our family of 5, we didn't have much money. So most books belonged to everybody. But this was the first book I remember was just mine. It wasn't for any of my brother or my sisters. And I went back to read it because I was asked to write an article about a book that had influenced me when I was middle school age. And I thought, or that I had loved when I was in middle school. And I read that book and I thought, boy, there are echoes of Bridge to Terabithia from The Yearling. I mean, that book really influenced me. The boy whose only friend, or well, not only friend, but because he did have that wonderful crippled friend that he loved, but he didn't see him very often, and he was with his dear friend, the Flag, and then Flag has to be killed because he's destroying their crops, being a deer. And so then, so I write a book about a boy who has a dear friend who dies, who has a mixed relationship with his father. And I mean, I hear the echoes. I was certainly totally unconscious of them when I was writing Bridge to Terabithia.
Well, since we're talking about the father in Bridge to Terabithia, I had heard that at the movie premiere, you kissed the evil T-1000 himself. You kissed Robert Patrick for his performance. Is that right?
Isn't that embarrassing?
No, very charming.
Maybe I just hugged him, but he looked somewhat startled, and I just said, "I'm sorry. I don't go around kissing strange men," but I was so afraid that scene was going to be messed up. And to me, it's the pivotal scene of the book. It's the most important thing that happens. And I said, "You just did it so beautifully." And I think he forgave me for kissing him when I told him how much I loved his work in my book, my movie, everybody's movie. Movies are very much a collaborative effort.
Well, you've had 4 of your works adapted for the film at this point, plus others in some stage of development.
Yeah. We, much to Disney's surprise, Bridge to Terabithia was a big hit. And so they were immediately on the phone saying, we're going to do Bridge to Terabithia number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, how Hollywood does things.
Sure.
And I said, "There's no sequel." He said, "Of course there's a sequel." I said, "No, there's not a sequel." And they had the big money guy from Walden call me up on the phone and tell me how important it was to make a sequel. And I said, "No, there's no sequel." And my son, who wrote the script and was one of the producers, said, no, there's no sequel. And so we've had a great deal of trouble assembling money since then, because Disney will not ever speak to us again, because there's no sequel to Bridge to Terabithia.
So, point, hadn't they wanted to change the ending so that Leslie simply went into a coma?
Oh, well, there were several suggestions, and that was certainly one of them. And my son, David, who is nothing if not dramatic, told me he stood there with this table full of executives with the book in his hand and shook it. And he said, read these last 28 pages. This book is loved all over the world because of these last 28 pages. You can't touch the last 28 pages. But it wasn't just because it was my book. It was because it was written because of his friend that died. And he was determined that it be a worthy tribute to Lisa Hill. And we didn't win all the battles, but we won the war, I think. I'm not ashamed of that movie.
Absolutely shouldn't be. It's a wonderful film, and knowing Hollywood, it will probably be remade another 5 times before they let it rest. They can figure out how to make.
They couldn't get themselves a sequel. And if there is a sequel, didn't have anything to do with it, folks. They may have to wait till I'm dead and do the sequel.
Well, with a film version of your novel, there must be a tremendous amount of apprehension, because if the film comes out and they change the novel, not everyone, you'll have your fans who read the book and loved it all over the world, and they'll know, but there'll be a whole bunch of other folks who never get around to reading the book and just watch the movie and say, well, that must be it. Because you had this happen 4 times, and presumably it will happen more. Does that fill you with apprehension, or is it enough that the book exists outside of the movie?
Well, I don't want a bad movie. There is a movie version of my novel, Liddy. And it was done by a company that works with the BBC. And I thought, well, I watch Masterpiece Theater all the time. I'd love their work. And so, sure, I'd love for them to do it. Don't ever watch it. Somehow, they have decided that it takes place in Canada. Well, they didn't have slavery up there. People ran away to Canada. So they could be freed from slavery. And Liddy is definitely not Irish. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So BBC, the company that worked with BBC, did a Hollywood thing on Liddy, which, I mean, even if done a good version, maybe I could have stood it, but it's just so corrupt. I mean, it's historically a mess. And so don't watch it. If you ever, it comes on a Canadian television every now and then. And since I live in Vermont, I could watch it if I wanted to, but I definitely do not want to. I don't think it's ever been shown in this country. But if you haven't watched the movie of the Great Gilly Hopkins, I think that is a simply wonderful adaptation of my book.
That's another one your son wrote as well, right?
Yeah. And both of my sons produced it. And we had a dickens of a time getting enough money. It was a shoestring budget, but it's really, really well done. And Mamie Trotter is so big. Now I have to come up with everybody's name, but Kathy Bates plays Mamie Trotter, and I just love what she did with it. I cry every time I watch it, and I've watched it, I think, 14 times now. And I think, well, this time I'm not going to cry, and then I do.
A lot of questions for you about I could keep you here all day and all night talking about was it 17 books that you've for children and young people that you published at this point?
Yeah, and Birdie will be 18.
Something I read
18 novels. I've got some picture books and easy to read, most of which are out of print. But I've got 18 novels.
Something you wrote in the acknowledgments for Birdie's Bargain that I absolutely believed, and yet it still shocked me. She wrote, "After I finish a book, I say to myself, well, that was a good career while it lasted, because I'm convinced that every book will be my last." And I believe you, but still, even now, 18 books, 2 Newberries, the Hans Christian Andersen.
You should see my children rolling their eyes when I say that. I said, well, this one surely is. I mean, look how old I am. And I'm not like some of I have writer friends who've got so many ideas, they'll never live long enough to write them. I finish a book and I think, well, that was great. But that's it.
Nothing left in the tank. You put it all on the page.
Yeah. And then something happened. I went to Cuba, and I thought, why don't people in America know about the amazing Cuban literacy campaign? It's a story that needs to be told, because we have to learn that there is good in our enemies, and there's less than good in our heroes. That's maturity, when you can recognize the good in those people that you don't admire, and the evil in the people that you adore.
Well, I assume you learned that rather viscerally because you were 5 when you had to leave China because it was being invaded by Japan, and then you ended up as a missionary in Japan at about 17, 18.
Yeah, and the as I've said, to be loved by people that you thought you had hated is a wonderful experience, and I wish everybody could have that experience.
Now that Birdie's Bargain is launching into the world, and that book is, you still got to go out there and promote it. Presumably, you'll be overseeing the movie version once that gets up and running. But have you got another idea yet, or are you waiting for the next idea?
No, I don't have another idea. What are you talking about? I haven't even gotten the hardback copy of this book. Give me a little time, Rob, to say I won't write another book.
What's the average time it takes you to get to your next idea?
Oh, well, I've been writing. I wrote my first novel in 1968, It was published, well, I mean, I started writing it in. It was published in 73. So 18 in that many years is not a lot of novels. I mean, some people do a novel a year, but, and I can't. I mean, I have written a novel in about a year, but something like Jacob I Love took almost 3 years, and Rebels of the Heavenly Kingdom took almost 3 years. And, you know, there are several things about writing a novel. One is that one idea does not a novel make. You start out with one idea and you run out of steam by the third chapter. A novel is woven together from a number of ideas that for a long time don't seem to even be related. And then you begin to see how they fit together in the one book. With Birdie's Bargain, I have in my files about 4 or 5 false starts for a book about a little girl standing in the middle of the road wearing a t-shirt that says, "I heart Jesus," and bawling her eyes out. I had that vivid picture of that child, but I didn't know why she was in the middle of the road. I didn't know why she was wearing that t-shirt. I didn't know what was going on in her life. And I tried several approaches to figure out what was happening. But it wasn't until I had another idea about writing about a child who becomes friends, if you can call it friendship, with someone who takes over her life. And because as a child, I had a number, we were moving so often, and I was so needy for friendship that I was easy pickings for predatory friends. And I had a string of them through my early years. And one of them was a pathological liar. And when I realized that I could put the child who's crying in the middle of the street because she's going to be very vulnerable, with the book about the child whose only friend is a pathological liar. It worked, but neither of those ideas worked by themselves. And I often think of Saying Stuff is Stars, because I had gone to Chittenden Correctional Center to talk with a group of prisoners about Great Gilly Hopkins, because they had read it in their book club. And they all had paperback copies of the book. And after we finished the session, they lined up to have their books autographed. And I was asking them their names so I could put their names in the book. And one young man said, well, it's not for me, it's for my daughter. Her name is Angel. And I wanted to write a book about a little girl named Angel whose father was in prison. And I couldn't do it because I didn't know what the story was, or, I mean, that's all I had. And then I was visiting a friend in California, and she gave me a copy of a magazine that her husband was the editor for, and had a picture of exploding supernova on the back of it that had been captured by the latest telescope. And it said, the telescope found these elements. And he said, the scientist said, these are the same elements that are in our bodies. And I thought, what would it mean to a child that the world considered waste material to know that she was made of the same stuff as the stars? And once I got those two ideas going, I could write the book, but I couldn't write it until I had the second idea. And then I had to give her a little brother because it was such a dismal book.
When that happens, when you find the other piece of the puzzle that now enables you to go forward, does that bring to mind, is that, do you think that that's your subconscious at work? Is there some version of a muse at work? Is there a guardian angel? What is that you think that leads you to that extra piece or missing piece?
Well, I'm biblically oriented. It's providential. But I think it's the kind of thing that happens a lot to writers. The thing you need suddenly appears. And I mean, I've had friends just, tell me over and over again about some incident like that. And when they've either been stuck or they've not known something, and it's just suddenly there for them. So, I before I became a real writer, I would go hear real writers speak. And sometimes they were so hokey. I thought, well, if I ever get to be a real writer, I'm not going to be hokey. And land of Goshen, am I hokey? Because there's something very mysterious about the whole process. Don't you think so? You're a writer.
In fact, I think as Birdie's having doubts about God, and she's wondering, is there anything to this? Well, Birdie, start writing a novel, and you will feel enough of, and you'll bump up against enough of a mystery that says, oh, okay, there it is. There is, it's not very practical, certainly not for if you're leading a writing workshop and you're trying to give people practical advice about how to get started.
It's what I don't teach. I really, people always wanting me to teach writing. And I thought, how can I teach writing when I don't know how I do it? I think there are people who are able to step aside from their own process enough to help people. Simply, I mean, I'm on the board of trustees of the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and the teachers there and the writing programs are absolutely amazing. And they do help people figure out how to shape a novel. And they can't give you talent, and they can't really give you ideas, but they can help you understand what makes a novel good and what makes it work. And I'm not smart enough to do that because I never learned how to do it. I just kind of did it, but I really do, as I said earlier, it's because I read so much. I think that's why subconsciously I know sort of how to shape a novel without ever being taught how to do it.
Well, I read in the acknowledgments you were thanking Varian Johnson and some other writers that you attended a workshop with. Yeah, Katherine Paterson comes into one of my workshops. I'm shutting down my presentation. I'm abandoning the lectern. So it's all yours. You'll take it from here.
No. In fact, I told the teachers I couldn't come to the workshop because they would people get intimidated for heaven's. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm an intimidating person at all, but apparently just because you've won a prize or two, people think, you know something. But they said, no, come in, it'll be fun. And that was the workshop where I figured out how to put those two stories in my childhood together. And it hadn't occurred to me. And then I thought, well, I'm in the workshop. I got to pretend I'm writing a book. So I thought, well, I'll start with the kid on the, in the I Heart Jesus t-shirt and see where I go from there. And that's when it occurred to me that I could put that other idea about the child who's taken advantage of by predatory.
So when you get started and you've got false starts with your initial image, but when you have those two pieces, what happens next? Is it you sit down every day and the story pours out of you over the course of a week? or what happens?
Well, I've heard writers say how that happens to them. And I've had days when it seems like it just flows magically. But most days, you're putting in a hard day's work. And I'm also the kind of writer who wants to know where I'm headed before I start. I don't like the feeling of just sitting down every day and thinking, oh, whatever. And I have friends who say, oh, if I knew how it was going to end, I'd be too bored to write it. Well, if I didn't know how it ended, I wouldn't ever get there. I'd be wandering off on a strange pathway. But if you know how it ends, I mean, this is me. Every writer is different. And that's why I can't teach anybody, because I have to do it my way. And that might not be anybody else's way. But I need to know where I'm headed. And sometimes when I get to where I thought I was headed, it changes. But at least I'm heading in that direction. And I try to get through a whole first draft. And Annie Lamott is very helpful telling you how awful first drafts are. And we don't use the language, but you have to realize your first draft is garbage. You're just getting to know your characters. And by the time you finish your first draft, which is garbage and should never be seen by the light of day, you know your character a little better. And every time you go through, you think, oh, well, and I know he would never have said that. That's just not anything that would ever occur to him. Or I know she wouldn't do that. Because now I know her better, and I know that would be manipulating her in a way that is not true to the character that you've gotten to know. So I love rewriting. I told my editor once that it was the only place in life where you could take spilt milk and turn it into ice cream. And so every time she was suggesting that something needed to be rewritten, she said, remember how much you love to rewrite, Katherine? And I do. That's my favorite part of the writing process. The first draft is very hard for me, but you can't rewrite anything you haven't written. So you have to write something so you can fix it, make it better. And, I just try to get to the end before I start trying to rewrite what I've written, because otherwise you spend your days polishing something that may never appear in the final book. So just get through. Know that you've created garbage in the first draft, but you've got something that you can make better, and that you're willing to put as much time in rewriting into it as it takes.
So how many drafts on average would you do for, say, Birdie's Bargain? And when do you know that you're done?
I don't know, because some parts you're going to rewrite many times. Other parts will stay the same as they were in the very first draft for some unknown reason. So when people ask me to count the drafts, I couldn't tell you. It's more, I just keep writing, keep working on it until it feels good to me, and then I'll send it to an editor and she'll tell me how bad it is, and then I'll write some more.
Is your editor your first reader?
No, for many years, but it was my husband. And then he died, and my editor, who edited from my very first book and was my editor for 40 years, was no longer able to edit. And I thought, well, I'll never write another book because my two main supports are gone. And I really sincerely thought that was the end. And I didn't mind, because I'd rather read than write anyhow. I could just read all I wanted to. I didn't have to work anymore. But then I went to Cuba, and I wanted to write that story. But we have this feeling, strong feeling, that you shouldn't write out of your culture. Well, my culture is pretty limited. I'm a 88-year-old lady who lives in a retirement community. And if I could only write books from my place in life, then I'm pretty limited. I believe strongly both in the imagination and in research. I'm willing to put in the work. And no one else had written that story about the Cuban literacy and the wonderful young people who are a part of it, and their courage, and not only to go into the wilds of Cuba to teach people how to read and write, but the courage and the kindness of the peasants and farmers that took them in, and because they wanted to learn how to read and write. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And I wanted it told. And no Cuban American had done it, partly because it's very hard for people who have such a vision of Castro's Cuba. They can't see that Castro did some good things for Cuba. He was a terrible dictator. In fact, my best friend there, I think all the time she's going to get jailed, because she was one of these young brigadistas in 61. And when I found that out, I thought, well, that explains the media, but it doesn't explain why she wouldn't put in jail, because she was always speaking her mind in a dictatorship, which is not a safe thing to do. And I'm not arguing about all the difficulties of Castro's Cuba, but I think we have to recognize they have they've got 99.9% literacy. We have 84%. They've got a wonderful medical program for everyone. They have free education from preschool through university. You can get a PhD in Cuba from not paying for it if you're capable and willing to do the work. So, we could learn something from our enemies if we're willing to.
It does seem to be, I don't know if this is a very American thing or if I just more aware of it that we're doing it. But then we say, okay, well, this other country is not perfect. Therefore, we're not going to listen to any of the things that they're doing.
Yeah. And well, in Brigadier, you might remember that in the end of the book, she says, no, my country's not perfect, but is yours.
And if you answer yes, number one, where are you? And number two, how much attention are you paying?
Exactly.
Well, I've got several questions about Birdie's Bargain for you because I really adored this book. Esteemed audience knows that I never summarize an author's book because why would I make you sit through me doing that? That would be terrible. So if you would give esteemed audience kind of an overview of Birdie's Bargain, and we'll go from there.
Well, what I tell people when they say, what is your new book about? I say, well, it's about a little girl who makes a bargain with God. God didn't keep his side of the bargain. And then they get a little worried, which they should. Of course, the book is a little more helpful than that. But everybody wants you to say it in one sentence. So that's my one sentence. But it's very much my 10-year-old self in many, many ways, my 9 and 10-year-old self. My father lost a leg in World War I, and I guess that's one reason why Birdie's father loses a leg. Of course, I never knew my father when he had 2 legs, but I don't even know how to answer that question any further than I have. You want to ask me another question? Maybe it would help.
Sure. Why set this during the Gulf War?
Well, that was one of my questions to begin with. Why is this child standing in the middle of the road and watching a disappearing car and not that she's not in? Why they're leaving her behind, whoever's going away, because she's obviously crying because she's being left behind. And so I didn't know when I started that it was because her father was going to war. At one point, I decided that her parents were going to go to Africa to teach for 3 years, and she didn't want to go because she was afraid to go to Africa. And I don't know at what point I gave that one up. But I do remember that was one of the possible solutions to the question of that's an interesting thing about the way a writer's mind works. Sometimes you simply have this picture, and this has happened to me a number of times, a very vivid picture of a character in a situation. And you don't know what the situation is. You don't even know the character yet. But your job is to figure out why that character is in that situation. And that becomes the book. I remember with Master Puppeteer, I had a vivid picture of a young boy in the upstairs of a storehouse, Japanese storehouse, looking for something that he couldn't find. And then as he's looking, he hears the sound on the stairs and he sees in the dark the white face of a warrior puppet coming towards him. And I had that picture, but I didn't know what he was looking for, why he was there, and why he was being menaced, apparently by a puppet. In Jip, his story, I had a vivid picture of a baby on a dirt road, and a wagon retreating away as though the baby has been left behind on the road. I had to figure out why this baby is on the road. So I guess other writers have, start with just a picture and then they have to figure out the meaning of the picture. I started different places with different books. Of course, with BRIDGE to Terabithia, I was just trying to make sense of a tragedy, an actual tragedy. Why would a little girl be struck by lightning when it didn't even seem to be a storm? It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And of course, you can't put that in a book because nobody would believe it. What actually, the actual event. I started writing Gilly Hopkins because we'd been asked to be temporary foster parents. And after the evacuation of the children from Cambodia, and they didn't know what to do with them. And they just asked people like us who had adopted and had therefore been cleared as proper parents if we take the boys in for a couple of weeks until they could figure out what to do. And I had to realize that I was not a good foster mother, because I was saying, well, you can't solve that problem because they're only going to be here for a couple of weeks. Of course, they were there for considerably more than a couple of weeks. Or I said, oh, thank heavens, they're only going to be here a short time. And I thought, I'm treating two human beings as though they're disposable. And human beings are not disposable. So I'm going to write a book with the best foster mother of all time, the one that I wasn't. And I thought,
possibly you've inspired someone else to be a wonderful foster mother after they've read the Great Gilly Hopkins. So
also, I thought, how would I feel if people regarded me as disposable? And I figured I would be furious. Of course, I realized later that I had two foster children in the story, and I might well have been William Ernest and been timid and frightened and withdrawn.
Well, I've now talked to enough authors who've written about terrible foster parents that I'm going to go ahead and put out there that although you might be very hard on yourself, you're way above average.
Well, I did have a wonderful experience at the National Book Festival. Well, the last time it was outdoors, which was, I can't remember what year that was. And there was a line for autographing. And then eventually this very tall, handsome Asian man came to the table and he said, "Miss Patterson, I'm Pitu, who is one of the children that we had fostered not many years ago." And I didn't, I mean, he was absolutely non-English speaking when he was with us, and adorable child, but very much persecuted by his older brother, who was a very angry child. And my other children wanted us to adopt Pitu, and I said, "No, we can't do that. We're just taking care of him." But the family that did become his permanent foster parents didn't want to have anything to do with us. And so he left our house one day and we never saw him or heard about him. The family that took the older brother, because the older brother did not want to be placed with his younger brother, kept in touch with us over the years. So it was their choice, not ours. But I was so touched to see little Pitu all grown up.
Found myself becoming a little nervous, not in a lack of faith sort of way, but as I was reading Birdie's Bargain, I knew, of course, that you had a history of mission work. I thought it was probably safe to assume which side of the atheist believer argument you might come down on. And I thought, well, now I'm gonna read something that maybe will have some platitudes and assure me that there's an easy answer. And that is absolutely not what I got. And in fact, I was shocked by it's a middle grade book, but you bring up the Diary of Anne Frank. There is plenty of darkness, real darkness that Birdie is addressing, and certainly we see some darkness with oh my God, it's got of Alicia Marie or Alice May. We get an example of some real darkness in the world. And it would have been so easy to have introduced a guardian angel character or a miracle somewhere in there that here you go, here's incontrovertible proof of God, therefore argument resolved. And you don't do that. You leave it ambiguous. I'm not ambiguous as to what Birdie comes away at, I think, toward the end. But you don't tell the reader how to think. And I'm also surprised by your restraint in that, you're presenting all sides of an argument that I assume you spent quite a lot of time thinking about. In fact, there's this quote that I absolutely love that I think encapsulate a lot of this. Birdie says at one where she writes in her diary, "Dear Heavenly Father, I'll stop acting like a jerk if you'll start acting like God and take care of us for a change." Which I absolutely love, because it's like, is that not it? Was there a temptation to provide? You've got a scene where a character talks directly to Birdie and provides some religious instruction. Did you have to write multiple drafts and say, "No, Katherine, don't put too much of your beliefs down on the paper"? Or
well, Gran has a lot of my beliefs in her. So as she talks to Birdie and tries to get Birdie to think about who God really is, and not the kind of God that's fire and brimstone and hatred. And but no, I mean, you're not writing a religious tract when you're writing a novel. You're writing a story. And the wonderful thing about a story is the reader gets to choose the real meaning. You lay it open for the reader to decide what the meaning is. You don't, I've written propaganda, and I hope it was good propaganda. But when you're writing a story, you're inviting the reader to interpret and choose. And if it has no meaning for them, then that's their choice. If it has a meaning different from what you wish they'd get from it, that's their choice. It's, you put your trust in the reader and give them permission to make the story their story.
You do. Too many bad writers don't, but you did. I think an atheist could read this book and say, yep, nope, as I thought, there is no God, but I really like the story about birds.
Oh, great. I didn't mean to go that far.
And I love and hate. I love him because I hate him. I really dislike Counselor Ron. In fact, I was reading the advanced reader copy, so before the final proof edit, and there was one typo that had him down as Counselor Rob, and I said, "Oh no," because he's. I assume Counselor Ron is a bit of your critique of some of Christian culture. Birdie is nervous about reading the books about science because Counselor Ron assures her she should not be reading those books. He puts up...
I hope he's not too much of a stereotype.
Well, I knew Counselor Ron when I was young and in church. I had some...
I've known a few.
I'm sorry?
I've known a few in my time, too.
You do just this wonderful job of illustrating the absolute harm that he has done to Birdie and her faith. Because now, not only is she worried about her father because she's made this bargain with God, she's not 100% that he's Counselor Ron's type of Christian. So not only might he die, he might go to hell. So she's got that added layer on top of all of her other concerns.
Oh.
And I'm assuming that's a conscious choice that, because, I assume Christians will sit down and read this, and maybe some who were in the camp of Harry Potter is, the devil's plaything, which I think you address in the book also. And they're going to say, oh, wait a moment. Am I a little bit more Counselor Ron than I should be?
and you know that the pastor of the church and the head of the camp is not that kind. He might be conservative, but he believes in kindness. And Counselor Rob, I think at one point says he thinks kindness is overrated. But his boss doesn't.
And I'm watching our time, and it's flying by, but I did want to ask you a little bit about description within the book, because I noticed that you don't spend a lot of time on physical description or our setting, but you say that Alicia Marie had the face of a chicken, she had the grip of a hawk, which is wonderful. We know that Grandma is beautiful, but you don't spend a lot of time telling us about hair color, eye color, outfits, unless they're the green sweater that's particularly important to the plot.
Well, that's kind of the way I write, because I like the reader to draw their own pictures, especially of the central character. And the whole, what I always consider hokum thing of having the protagonist look into a mirror and describe themselves.
There's absolutely none of that.
We don't have that.
And I did not miss it. I had a very clear vision of what everyone looked like. It's only because I'm a book nerd that I was in there highlighting. I'm like, nope, it's not there, and I don't need it. Look like Katherine Patterson.
It's amusing to me that the person who is most described in detail is Alicia Marie or Alice May. And I did that because Birdie's studying her. And what Birdie is seeing when she looked at Alice Marie Alicia Marie or Alice May is quite different from what she's Alice is saying about herself. The lie is physical as well as well as what she says.
I felt for Birdie, I was also that child. I like pathological liars, at least for a short period of time. They always have the most interesting stories.
Absolutely.
But I love this. This might be my favorite line in the book. It's one I'm going to be thinking about next time I'm in a long conversation. Is if she'd even wanted to, there wasn't a teeny weeny hole in Alicia's endless wall of sentences to poke a word through. Which, if that isn't that conversation to a T.
We've known several people that way, haven't we, Rob? No.
Well, esteemed audience knows I have to ask, because I ask everybody, and I'm not going to chicken out just because I'm talking to one of my childhood heroes. Every author who comes out here gets asked, Katherine Patterson, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost, and or, because it's you, existence of God, a proof of the existence of God beyond faith?
I've never seen a flying saucer. I don't think I've ever seen a ghost. And I have no proof of the presence of God because it's faith. I feel very close to God sometimes, but you could write that off as my imagination if you didn't believe it. And I feel loved. Yeah, that's my proof is just about that.
Fair enough. Shoot, I thought you'd have some hard evidence for me, and the next time Hugh Howey comes on, I could say, I could play the clip and say, look, there's the evidence.
No, I don't, and I think there may be ghosts. How do we know? Because I certainly felt the presence of people I love who've died. You call that a ghost?
When you in the acknowledgments with the words of Sister Anne, is it Duhame, who asked you, where have you seen God lately?
Yeah.
Where have you seen God lately?
Well, this morning, when I was having my quiet time, I looked out and I saw this tiny little bird just fly right up into the sky. And I said, that's faith. That bird is going into the heavens. The wingspan was about like that. And I thought, sometimes I feel God in the tree outside my window and in the grass. And the Creator is in everything that He's created. I say He because I'm 88 years old. I know God does not have gender as we have. And I don't mind saying she. I just am not going to ever say it watching over Israel, neither slumbers not nor sleeps. But we don't, it's interesting in Japanese because they have pronouns, but they don't use them very much. So the things that feminists feel so awful in the Bible. A lot of it's just because of the English translation. We use pronouns that express gender. And in Japanese, the pronouns usually, the subjects are very often subsumed in the verb itself. So you don't have that problem of God being either he or she. So, but I'm not going to say God it. So I've said God he all my life. And so to me, it's awkward to say, use a feminine pronoun for God, even though I don't think God is like a man. In fact, I know a lot of women who seem more godlike than a lot of men.
Well, I'm fine with either gender. I do wonder sometimes why it would be a comfort to someone to think that, oh, God's the same gender as me. God's like me. Why would that be comforting to you?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
If God's like me, we're in a lot of trouble.
Well, the thing about it is that, the Bible has so many images of God, and they're not always tied to male images. The woman sweeping the floor, to find the lost coin, is an image of God and his love, and the wonderful image like a mother loving her children. There are plenty of female images of God in the Bible. So God is good.
I've got one final question for you, because I promised you we'd end within a reasonable time, and you've been so very generous with your time. This has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. And this is an episode I'm going to go back and I'm going to re-listen to multiple times to prove to myself that really happened. I really got to have such a wonderful conversation. But my final question for you, usually where I like to end the show, is some variation of, if you could go back to the start of your writing career, the middle, wherever would be useful to you, and give yourself some advice that would have made a crucial difference for you and might make a crucial difference for everyone who's listening to us or watching us, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I started writing so late. I was in my 40s when my first novel was published. So I already wasn't taking myself too seriously. And I think that's probably the advice I would give. And sometimes I have to still give myself that advice. But I think sometimes we just need to remind ourselves it's not all about me. And I'm sure I've had to do that at the beginning, middle, and shall we say the end, when you're not going to let me say the end of my career?
We're going to do this again in a couple of years. Next book. I expect to read several more novels from you before you.
Oh, me. Well, all my friends are either dead or retired. I think it would be all right for me to retire, don't you think?
Well, I would have thought so, but here we are talking about Birdie's Bargain.
I meant to retire several times. Oh, me. Well,
everyone would have understood if you wanted to call it a day after my Brigadusta year, but no.
I broke my leg. I had to do something.
Where can esteemed audience find you online and find more information about you and your books?
Am I supposed to tell people? Well, I'm rebuilding my website right at the moment. But that's either katherinepatterson.com or terabithia.com. And we're still kind of working on that. I don't Twitter. I don't Instagram. I have a Facebook account, which my son John is kind enough to run for me. So sometimes my friends will say, tell John not to put in so many exclamation points, because nobody's going to believe it's you if it has all those exclamation points. But, you know, I tell him things to put in there too. I just don't do it every day. And I don't do all the things they tell you now all writers have to do. And I figure, too bad, because I've got other things to do with my life than promote myself. So, you know, I'm fine. I'm comfortable, and I don't need to push myself. I need to learn how to be a more loving, better person. And that should take more time than pushing some fake image of myself. So, but I am on Facebook, and often I say things. Sometimes my son puts things up for me. And, but we try to do things that we think would be interesting and helpful. Anything else, Rob?
I think we've well, since you asked, no. No, we'll call it a night. I won't get greedy. I'll save some questions for the next book. When we do this again, I'll have them all ready to go. Esteemed audience, you know who I am. Head to middlegradeninja.com for interviews with all the best people. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Beanies. It'll change your life. And if it doesn't, it's free. And as always, God willing and I'm alive, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rob.